Hello, you beautiful souls out there, you movers, you shakers, you visionary makers. I'm your host, Guy Sheridan, and welcome to another episode of Under One Sky, where we see solutions, hear humanity, and feel the future, having life discussions that build better communities. Today, I have a very special guest. His name is JC. He's a horticulture engineer and someone who's been very instrumental in my own life, helping me just awaken my own soul as a deep feeler and deep thinker, but somebody who also has helped with Sky Farms, built his own communities, and who's done a lot of really good in the world in moving forward the discussion in how to generate our own food locally and how to grow food properly without wasting so many resources. JC, thank you so much for being on the show today. So you're called JC. Obviously, that's short for
Joseph Chidiac.
Very good. Okay.
You didn't want to butcher my name?
No, and I know how to say your name after all this time, but I was just wanting you to say it in your own way. Why JC? Is there a reason why people call you JC or that you call yourself JC?
It's an homage to my American grandfather, CB Norgard.
For some reason, what's been coming up a lot for me and very interesting to know more about you is your Lebanese roots. Like, I would like to hear more about how are you Lebanese, or how does Lebanese come up in your life, and share a little bit about that if you can.
Sure. First of all, it's not my fault. Second of all, it's not that simple.
Nothing really ever is, right?
Yeah. Because I'm half Lebanese and half American, and as such, will probably never fit in either place or be fully accepted. And I've accepted that a long time ago. That's quite all right. You just confine yourself to being a citizen of the world, and commit yourself to being a weirdo.
Yeah. Amen to the weirdos. Keep your weird.
That's absolutely.
The shirt we've been wanting to make a t-shirt for a long time that says keep your weird, because that's who we are, obviously.
That's right.
So which half is Lebanese and which half is American?
My dad is Lebanese, and he ended up going to college in the States on a scholarship during the Civil War. And got placed in North Dakota with a scholarship, sending Middle Easterners to North Dakota. That's fair. He met my mother in North Dakota. That's where she's from. And she was down for an exotic life. And so they moved to Boston, where I was born. Spent just a couple of years of my infancy, and then we moved to the UAE. That's where my brother was born. And you already know, right? Most countries don't give you citizenship by being born there. Otherwise, my brother would have oil rights.
No way. Wow.
Anyways, we quickly moved to Lebanon after that, and I lived there from age 4 to 16. And then ended up back in the U.S. visiting my grandparents while the Hezbollah-Israel fight was going on, and ended up getting into the university here at 16 as a refugee. So wow. I was stoked.
JC, that I did not know that about you, actually. This is the thing that's been missing from our relationship this whole time is like your past. So your formative years you basically spent in Lebanon.
Oh, yeah.
Correct? Yeah, and where was that? Like Beirut or?
Just north of Beirut. So Lebanon is a little bit geographically divided along religious lines. Right. And so there's the center. It's a long country up and down the coast on the Mediterranean. And you've got the Christians in the kind of the central pocket, dividing the different types of Muslims from each other, because, and that's a long story, Civil War. But it's beautiful. It's naturally really beautiful. We got to go to the beach a lot. There's mountains that kind of my preference, and lots of ruins, a whole lot of history there.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also...
It's been around for a long time, Lebanon, right? I mean...
Exactly. So you can see, Phoenician ruins, and Roman and Greek ruins, and Ottoman ruins, and Crusader ruins, and the culture, the people are just as mixed as their history is. Yeah. I grew up passing by Syrian checkpoints on the way to school, like it was Syrian occupation. So you'd stop the car and wave at the Syrian soldier, and then you'd get to school, and the lecture would be interrupted by Israeli planes breaking the sound barrier, shelling force. And of course, we gained our independence more recently, 2015.
Yeah.
So never a dull moment.
I think it's just so fascinating that you've been through stuff like that, like to have to go through a checkpoint to go to school. I mean, I wouldn't even know what that's like. And I imagine when you came to America, you were probably like, oh my gosh, these people have it really easy,
Yeah, I did think that.
If they only knew, like going to the grocery store, they have like 50 different choices of like detergent,
So Lebanon is actually, it used to be the Paris of the Middle East. Now it's probably the Vegas of the Middle East. It's where the other Arabs who are very strict come to drink and gamble and so on and so forth. And so,
Interesting.
there's a lot of variety.
That's a perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about, which was like Khalil Gibran, was on my docket today to talk about because um, I've had the book The Prophet in my life since I was young. It was on my
Yeah,
grandmother's
so
shelf. It
good.
was on my mother's shelf. I read it when I was very young, even when I couldn't understand it. And then, of course, it brought the context became so much more important when I got later on in life and could understand it. But I did significant research on where he came from and then figured out he was living in Lebanon at the time. And if you read The Prophet, you do get a sense of how it was sort of like the crossroads of the world. It was almost like the New York of the Middle East, I guess, at the
It
time.
was. It was a gateway. It was the whole Mediterranean door
Yeah.
to the Far East and Africa and everything.
Yeah, and I think he wrote it in like 1920s. I think that's when The Prophet came out. So I mean, obviously 1920s Lebanon was very different than, today's cluster
It
F
was. It was
of it.
booming.
Yeah, and that's so sad because so many Middle Eastern cultures actually were, I think, like the gateway to the world, right, back in the day, and then somehow became much more strict and I don't know, locked down. Of course, revolutions happened, and
It's not a mystery. It's sabotage.
tell
But
me,
that's a
tell me
big,
about it.
big topic.
No,
The
but
point is, now I'm not going to change the subject because
okay,
that book is so wonderful. Not only because he's one of the leading philosophers of the 20th century, but there's very few books of that nature that get to touch on so many subjects
mm,
in a small tome. So I've got a selection here.
that's great. I have a couple of my own as well. Haha, you came prepared.
That basically, he's spent his entire life with these people and is about to leave them forever. So back then, traveling probably meant you were never going to see anybody again. So he spends the afternoon just, dumping everything he can on them, and it's a whole lot of wisdom. One of my favorite little quotes here is, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars." And I know you personally can probably attest to this. It's,
I
it's a big
literally
deal.
just felt that, JC. Thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that.
But I encourage your listeners, hopefully, to not shield themselves from all suffering because it has tremendous value. Reasonable, controlled suffering, difficulty, challenge in your life really makes you more
It
of a
does.
person, more of an intricate creation. And so it has a lot of value that way. At the same time, the flip side is you don't want to be the cause of suffering to others, and we need to be more conscious of that because it traumatizes. Even in medicine, genetics research right now, they're discovering epigenetics, which means trauma can affect your genes through generations.
Oh
It's
wow,
very hard,
I must be a mutant.
probably, and that's a superpower if you know how to channel it. But the idea is that you can do irreparable damage to people, so you need to be careful. But at the same time, you can do tremendous good to people as well and yourself. So
Yeah.
just everybody needs to realize the power they have. Don't underplay that.
And also that suffering is kind of sort of like if you allow it to be, of course, we'll talk about this in a little bit with the empathetic civilization and Jeremy Riffin.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll touch on that. But for me, it's like suffering helps connect you sometimes to people, right?
really does.
I've lived I've traveled so much in my fashion days, of course, and I've
Hmm.
been in many different situations. I think particularly like very foreign to me, and sometimes like when I was living in Harlem, for instance, my first couple of weeks there, it was like I was the only white guy, around, whatever.
Nice.
But it's always this weird thing that I'm not scared of things that are different than me or cultures that are different than me or situations that might even seem very scary to be in some ways. Because I realize that through my own suffering that other people probably have suffered, and I can see suffering actually in some strange way around me, and I connect to people, and it does help me build community better. I think it does help me understand other people's pains and um, yeah, and have deep compassion and kind of more vulnerability.
Yeah,
Suffering helps you be really vulnerable, which is a huge strength, actually. I think
yeah. You don't need to be afraid of that.
but of course you've been through um, a really hard time with your struggle with cancer, right? I mean, you went through a whole time of recovery and um, do you want to share a little bit about that, what that was like for you, or
Yeah. So the thing about suffering is, in the moment, it's horrible, but afterwards, it's a memory. And so now I can tell you, cancer was one of the best things that ever happened to me.